You're telling me these hairless bipeds with their laughably fragile bodies and pathetically short lifespans are our last hope? Grand Admiral Zix Vorns, this has to be a joke. Commander Trill shifted uncomfortably on her four rear limbs while her front pair gestured toward the holographic display. With all due respect, Admiral, the data doesn't lie. The humans have demonstrated remarkable adaptability. Adaptability. The Admiral's compound eyes flashed with bioluminescent contempt. Is that what we're calling suicidal recklessness these days? The war room of the Arthean flagship Inevitable Dominance hummed with the background noise of a civilization on the brink of extinction. The hegemony's forces had pushed through the outer colonies with ruthless efficiency, their hive-mind tactics overwhelming even the most sophisticated Arthean defenses. 7 galactic cycles of brutal conflict had reduced the once proud Arthean Collective to a handful of core systems. The Council has already approved the Alliance proposal, Trill continued, her exoskeleton flushing a light purple with stress pheromones. The human representative should be arriving within the next rotation. One representative, not even a delegation. The Admiral's antennae twitched with disbelief. Do they not comprehend the gravity of our situation? Actually, came a voice from the entryway. We comprehend it perfectly. Every Arthean in the room swiveled toward the source of the interruption. Standing there, quite literally standing on only 2 limbs like some kind of biological anomaly, was a human. The creature was draped in some kind of synthetic fabric that hung loosely from its frame, and its exposed skin was a peculiar pinkish beige that made it look perpetually undercooked. Lieutenant Casey Blackwell, Terran Strategic Command, the human announced, striding into the room with an easy confidence that bordered on offensive given the circumstances. Sorry about the dramatic entrance. Your security drones are remarkably chatty once you hack their basic communication protocols. Admiral Zix Vorn's carapace darkened with rage. You hacked our security systems? More like, persuaded them to look the other way. The human's face contorted into what Trill recognized from her xenobiology briefings as a smile, a baring of teeth that somehow didn't signal imminent aggression. Don't worry, I didn't break anything. Much. This is precisely the kind of reckless behavior that makes your species so effective? Lieutenant Blackwell interrupted, reaching into a pocket and withdrawing a small device. Mind if I plug in? I brought some intel that might change your perspective. Before anyone could object, the human had already connected the device to the central holographic projector. The display flickered, then stabilized to show detailed schematics of what appeared to be hegemony battlecruisers. Where did you get this classified information? Trill asked, her scientific curiosity overriding protocol. Let's just say the hegemony's cybersecurity is more security theater than actual security. Blackwell manipulated the projection, highlighting specific sections of the enemy ships. They've got a critical vulnerability in their propulsion systems. Hit them here, here, and here with precisely calibrated electromagnetic pulses, and their entire fleet becomes very expensive space debris. Admiral Zix Vorn's compound eyes narrowed. If this vulnerability is genuine, why hasn't your military exploited it already? Because we need your help to deploy it effectively, Blackwell replied, switching the display to show what looked like modified Arthean vessels. Your crystalline tech can focus the EMPs better than anything we've got. Our scientists have designed these modifications for your ships, but we need your engineers to implement them. Cooperation, Trill murmured, her antennae perking up with interest. A truly novel concept. Exactly. Blackwell's smile widened. The hegemony expects us to fight separately and die separately. They've never encountered a true alliance before. They literally can't conceive of species with different evolutionary paths working together. That's their weakness. And what does Earth gain from this alliance? The Admiral demanded. Your homeworld is still months away from hegemony territory by conventional FTL. Blackwell's expression turned serious. We've seen this pattern before in our own history. The hegemony isn't stopping with the Arthean Collective. They're methodically eliminating potential threats before they become actual threats. We're just further down their list. Preemptive self-preservation, Trill translated. Logical. Plus, Blackwell added with that strange smile again, humans have this annoying habit of rooting for the underdog. It's gotten us into trouble more times than I can count. Admiral Zix Vorn made a sound that the universal translator couldn't quite interpret. Very well, Lieutenant. You've earned a hearing. But be warned. If this is some elaborate deception, I'll personally ensure that humans move to the top of the hegemony's list. Fair enough, Blackwell nodded. Now, let me introduce you to what we humans call asymmetric warfare. 3 standard rotations later, Commander Trill found herself in the ship's engineering bay, watching in fascination as Lieutenant Blackwell argued with Chief Engineer HFY over the modifications to the Arthean vessels. But the polarization will destabilize at these energy levels, HFY insisted, his work appendages gesticulating wildly at the schematics. That's why we're reconfiguring the containment field to account for the phase variance, Blackwell countered, pointing at calculations that sprawled across 3 separate holographic panels. Look, if you adjust the crystalline matrix alignment by just 7 degrees, the resonance actually strengthens the field instead of weakening it. Impossible. The theoretical models clearly show. Your theoretical models are based on assumptions that don't account for quantum tunneling effects at this scale, Blackwell interrupted. Trust me, we've tested this. Well, simulated it, extensively. Simulated? Kaztvek's mandibles clicked in alarm. You mean this has never been practically demonstrated? Not at this specific scale, no. Blackwell shrugged. But the math checks out. The math checks out, the engineer repeated, his voice modulator conveying pure disbelief. Is this how humans typically approach potentially catastrophic engineering challenges? With the math checks out? Pretty much, yeah. Blackwell grinned. How do you think we got to space in the first place? Our first rockets were basically controlled explosions with people strapped on top. Commander Trill, who had been quietly observing the exchange, finally spoke up. Lieutenant, perhaps you could explain why you seem so comfortable with uncertainty. Blackwell paused, considering the question. I guess it's because uncertainty is our natural habitat. Humans evolved on a planet that tried to kill us in new and creative ways every day. Predators, diseases, natural disasters, you name it. We survived by adapting quickly and taking calculated risks. But this isn't a calculated risk, Kiztviuk protested. This is gambling with lives. Every battle is gambling with lives, Blackwell replied, suddenly serious. The difference is whether you're playing with the house edge or against it. Right now, fighting the hegemony conventionally is like betting against the house. You might win a few rounds, but eventually you lose everything. And your plan gives us the edge? Trill asked. It gives us a chance, Blackwell corrected. In my experience, sometimes a chance is all you need. Kazitvik's appendages fidgeted nervously with a crystalline component. Your confidence is not reassuring, human. Would you prefer I panic? Because I can do that too, just not as productively. Blackwell took the component from the engineer and examined it. Look, I get it. Your species evolved from hive-building arthropods. You value certainty, structure, predictability. But sometimes you need chaos to fight chaos. The hegemony is anything but chaotic, Trill pointed out. Their hive mind gives them perfect coordination. Exactly. Blackwell's eyes lit up. They're too coordinated. They move like a single organism with billions of parts. But an organism that complex needs rules, patterns, protocols. Break those patterns, introduce enough random variables, and their coordination becomes their weakness. Kiztvik's antennae twitched thoughtfully. You propose to use their strength against them. It's an old human combat philosophy. The bigger they are, yes? The harder they fall, Blackwell finished with a grin. Now, about these crystal alignments. As the human and the engineer returned to their work, Commander Trill found herself re-evaluating her assessment of humanity. Perhaps their chaotic nature wasn't an evolutionary flaw, but rather a different kind of adaptation. One that the orderly, hierarchical species of the galaxy had never needed to develop. For the first time since the war began, she felt something that her species rarely experienced: spontaneous optimism. This is absolute madness, Admiral Zixvorn declared, his carapace practically vibrating with agitation. You want us to deliberately expose our fleet to enemy fire? The briefing room was tense as Lieutenant Blackwell stood before the Arthean High Command, outlining what could only be described as tactical insanity. Not the entire fleet, Blackwell clarified, manipulating the holographic battle map. Just these 3 squadrons. They'll appear vulnerable, baiting the hegemony forces into this position. A section of space highlighted in red. Meanwhile, your main fleet will be here. Another section highlighted in blue, hidden in the electromagnetic shadow of the Kazoran Nebula. The nebula will blind our sensors as well, pointed out Strategic Officer Visa Tick. We'll be flying blind. That's where these come in. Blackwell produced a handful of small devices from a case. Quantum entangled communicators. They operate outside normal subspace channels. The hegemony can't detect or intercept them. Trill, now serving as the unofficial liaison between human and Arthean forces, examined one of the devices. This technology is remarkably sophisticated. We've had to get creative with our comtech, Blackwell explained. Earth's history is basically one long series of people trying to eavesdrop on each other. And these squadrons serving as bait, the Admiral continued, still skeptical. They're accepting a suicide mission? Not suicide. Sacrifice play. Big difference. Blackwell zoomed in on the proposed battlefield. They'll take hits, yes, but they're equipped with the modified shields we designed together. They can hold out long enough for the main fleet to spring the trap. I dislike depending so heavily on untested technology, Visa-Tick said. Then I have good news and bad news, Blackwell replied. The good news is, it's no longer untested. The bad news is how we tested it. The Admiral's compound eyes flashed dangerously. Explain. Remember that hegemony patrol that got a little too close to the Draven system yesterday? Blackwell pulled up a new set of images on the display. They encountered what they thought was a damaged Arthean scout ship. The images showed the aftermath of what appeared to be a surprisingly one-sided battle. You engaged a hegemony patrol without authorization? The Admiral's voice had gone dangerously quiet. Technically, I engaged them, Blackwell corrected. Borrowed one of your decommissioned scouts, retrofitted it with our prototype systems, and took it for a field test. You faced a hegemony patrol alone? Trill couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. Their smallest patrols consist of at least 3 warships. 5, actually. Blackwell's casual tone was almost offensive, given the implications. They didn't expect a single vessel to attack them directly. By the time they realized what was happening, 3 of their ships were already dead in space. The other 2 managed to escape, but not before we collected valuable data on their response patterns. A stunned silence fell over the room. You should have been destroyed, Viz-Tick finally said. Probably, Blackwell agreed cheerfully, but the math checked out. The Admiral's antennae twitched in what might have been reluctant admiration. You staked your life on theoretical calculations. Better mine than yours, Blackwell replied. If the modifications failed, you'd only lose 1 annoying human instead of valuable Arthean ships and crews. A logical approach, Trill noted, if somewhat personally risky. That's humanity in a nutshell, Blackwell grinned. We're talking calculated risks. The Admiral studied the battle data for several long moments before speaking again. The hegemony will adapt their tactics now that they've encountered your technology. Counting on it, Blackwell said. They'll strengthen their electronic countermeasures, reconfigure their shields, maybe even modify their weapons, all of which will drain power from their central systems, exactly where our main attack will hit them. You're using their adaptability against them, Visa-Tick realized, forcing them to prepare for the wrong threat. Classic misdirection, Blackwell confirmed. While they're focused on defending against what I did yesterday, they'll be completely unprepared for what we're going to do tomorrow. The Admiral's carapace shifted to a thoughtful blue hue. You realize, Lieutenant, that if your plan fails, you will have accelerated the destruction of what remains of the Arthean Collective. And if we do nothing, the result is the same, just slower. Blackwell's expression turned serious. Sometimes, Admiral, the only way to win an unwinnable game is to flip the table. A crude metaphor, the Admiral observed, but not inaccurate. He straightened to his full height, towering over the human. Very well, Lieutenant Blackwell. We will proceed with your table-flipping strategy. May the cosmic architects have mercy on us all. Trust me, Blackwell said with a confidence that bordered on madness. After tomorrow, the hegemony will be the ones praying for mercy. The battle, if it could even be called that, unfolded with a precision that belied its chaotic appearance. On the bridge of the Arthean command ship, Inevitable Dominance, now safely hidden within the nebula, Lieutenant Blackwell watched alongside Admiral Zix Vorn as the vulnerable Arthean squadrons executed their part of the plan perfectly. They appeared to struggle, to falter, to make tactical errors that no self-respecting Arthean commander would ever commit. The hegemony took the bait. They're committing their reserve forces, Strategic Officer Visa-Tick reported, monitoring the quantum-entangled feeds. Central Command vessel is moving into optimal position. Right on schedule, Blackwell murmured, glancing at the chronometer. They really are predictable once you understand their pattern recognition algorithms. Admiral Zix Vorn's compound eyes never left the tactical display. The sacrificial squadrons are taking heavy damage, but still operational, Trill added from her station. Shield modifications are holding. For now, the Admiral noted grimly. Blackwell checked a series of calculations on her personal device. Hegemony fleet formation is at 93% optimal density. 3 more minutes until they reach target configuration. Our squadrons may not have 3 minutes, Tick warned. They'll hold, Blackwell said with such conviction that even the skeptical Artheans found themselves believing it. They know what's at stake. The minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. On the display, Arthean ships flared and dimmed as they absorbed punishing salvos from the encircling hegemony vessels. The formation tightened, the noose closing around what the hegemony perceived as the last gasp of Arthean resistance. Target density achieved, Tick announced. Signal the squadrons, Blackwell ordered, suddenly all business. Execute Phoenix Protocol. What happened next would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for generations to come. The dying Arthean ship suddenly unleashed a synchronized burst of energy, not at the hegemony vessels, but at precise coordinates in the apparently empty space between them. The crystalline focuses, modified according to Blackwell's specifications, concentrated the energy into patterns that seemed random to casual observation. They weren't random. The energy burst triggered a cascading reaction in the hegemony's interconnected systems. Ship after ship suddenly went dark, their lights flickering out like candles in a windstorm. The few vessels that remained operational began to move erratically, as if their navigation systems were receiving conflicting commands. Now! Blackwell shouted, unnecessary but unable to contain the adrenaline surge. Main fleet engage! The Arthean command fleet burst from the nebula, weapons already charged and targeting systems locked on the crippled hegemony vessels. It wasn't a battle so much as a cleanup operation. Within minutes, the once mighty hegemony attack force was reduced to scattered debris and disabled ships drifting helplessly in the void. By the cosmic architects, Admiral Zixvorn breathed, his normally impassive exoskeleton flushed with the blue-green of astonishment. It worked. Of course it worked, Blackwell replied, though the relief in her voice betrayed that she hadn't been quite as certain as she'd pretended. The math checked out. What exactly did we just witness? Trill asked, her scientific curiosity overwhelming her military decorum. Blackwell's face split into that disconcerting human smile. We exploited a fundamental flaw in their hive-mind architecture. Those energy bursts created a specific pattern of quantum fluctuations that essentially gave their central processing network the equivalent of a seizure. You gave their fleet a neurological condition? Tick seemed torn between horror and admiration. More or less, Blackwell shrugged. We noticed that their coordination relied on quantum entanglement at a specific frequency. Disrupt that frequency with precisely calibrated interference patterns, and their entire command structure collapses. The Admiral's antennae twitched with newfound respect. You turned their greatest strength into their greatest vulnerability. That's the human way, Blackwell said, monitoring the ongoing mop-up operation. Find the pattern, break the pattern, create a new pattern that works in your favor. The hegemony will adapt, Tick warned. This tactic will not work a second time. It doesn't need to, Blackwell replied. We just needed it to work once, to buy us time to implement Phase 2. The Admiral's compound eyes fixed on the human. Phase 2? This was merely the first stage of your strategy? Admiral, Blackwell said with a grin that could only be described as predatory. We're just getting started. In the aftermath of the battle, which was already being called the Miracle of Kazoran throughout Arthean space, Commander Trill found Lieutenant Blackwell in one of the ship's observation lounges, staring out at the stars. The human appeared smaller somehow, the manic energy that had carried her through the past rotations finally ebbing away. Lieutenant? Trill approached cautiously, unsure of human post-battle protocols. The Admiral has requested your presence at the strategy session. I'll be there in a minute, Blackwell replied without turning. Just needed a moment to process. Trill moved to stand beside the human, her 4 rear limbs settling into a comfortable stance as she gazed out at the same vista. Is this a human mourning ritual for those lost in battle? That earned a small laugh. Something like that. We call it decompression. After the adrenaline wears off, after you've cheated death one more time, there's a kind of emptiness that follows. Not quite sorrow, not quite relief. Just quiet. Your cultural briefings did not mention this aspect of human psychology, Trill noted. Yeah, well, we don't like to advertise our vulnerabilities. Blackwell finally turned to face the Arthean commander. Your people fought well today. Better than I expected, honestly. They were inspired, Trill said simply. By you. Blackwell shook her head. I just provided a plan. They provided the courage to execute it. You misunderstand. Trill's antennae dipped in what humans might recognize as earnestness. It was not your plan that inspired them, but your willingness to risk yourself first. When you returned from that unauthorized mission against the Hegemony Patrol, it changed something in the collective consciousness of our forces. Oh. Blackwell seemed genuinely surprised. That wasn't calculated, you know. I just needed to test the tech without risking your people. That is precisely what was inspiring, Trill explained. The Arthean military philosophy has always been one of calculated sacrifice for the greater good. But we calculate using statistics, probabilities, strategic value assessments. You calculated using yourself. Humans tend to take things personally. Blackwell smiled faintly. It's probably our biggest flaw and our greatest strength. Trill's head tilted in a gesture of curiosity. The Admiral wishes to know if you truly have a Phase 2, or if that was merely psychological warfare meant for any hegemony intelligence that might be monitoring our communications. Oh, I have a Phase 2, all right, Blackwell confirmed, her energy seeming to return. And a Phase 3, 4, and 5 if we need them. May I ask what Phase 2 entails? It's simple, really. Blackwell's expression shifted to something Trill couldn't quite interpret with her limited understanding of human facial dynamics. Now that we've proven we can hurt them, we're going to offer them a chance to surrender. Trill's carapace rippled with surprise. Surrender? The hegemony does not surrender. Their entire cultural ethos is built around expansion and domination. They would rather die than acknowledge defeat. Exactly, Blackwell said with a predatory smile. They'll refuse our offer in the most insulting way possible, which will give us the moral justification to unleash Phase 3. Which is? Let's just say that their hive mind has more vulnerabilities than they realize, and we've only exploited the most obvious one so far. Blackwell straightened her uniform. Shall we join the Admiral? As they walked through the corridors of the inevitable dominance, Trill found herself contemplating the strange, contradictory nature of humans. They were simultaneously reckless and calculating, emotional and logical, fragile and resilient. Perhaps that was their true evolutionary advantage, not specialization, but adaptability through paradox. Commander, Blackwell said suddenly, interrupting Trill's thoughts. Can I ask you something? Of course, Lieutenant. Before I arrived, when you were briefing the Admiral about humans, what exactly did you tell him that made him so skeptical? Trill's mandibles clicked in what might have been embarrassment. I may have emphasized certain aspects of human physiology that, in hindsight, gave an incomplete picture of your species' capabilities. Such as? Your lack of exoskeletal protection, your limited sensory apparatus, your inefficient respiratory system, your bizarre reproductive methodology. Trill's antennae drooped slightly. In my defense, these were all factual observations. Blackwell laughed, a sound that still struck Trill as oddly musical for a species with no specialized sound-producing organs. No wonder he looked at me like I was made of tissue paper when I first arrived. The Admiral has since revised his assessment, Trill assured her, as have we all. Good to know. Blackwell paused outside the door to the strategy room. Because what comes next is going to require even more faith in humanity's bizarre methods. After today, Trill said with complete sincerity, I believe the Arthean Collective is prepared to embrace bizarre. The hegemony's response to the offering of surrender terms was, as Blackwell had predicted, both prompt and insulting. The message was broadcast across all subspace frequencies, ensuring that every species in the sector would hear their defiance. And so these pathetic creatures, these Artheans, who hide behind the innovations of a barely evolved primate species, dare to offer us terms of surrender. The hegemony overmind's translated voice dripped with contempt. The collective exists only because we have not yet decided to eradicate it completely. This momentary setback changes nothing. The hegemony is eternal. The hegemony is inevitable. The hegemony is... Admiral Zixvorn switched off the transmission with an irritated click of his mandibles. They do enjoy the sound of their own voice, don't they? Actually, Blackwell said from her position at the conference table, they just gave us exactly what we needed. Strategic Officer Visa Tick looked skeptical. An explicit rejection of reasonable terms? Not just that. Blackwell was already working on her datapad, fingers flying across the surface. That transmission contained embedded quantum signatures unique to the Overmind itself. We can use those to locate the hegemony central consciousness. Trill leaned forward, suddenly alert. You can track the overmind through a propaganda broadcast? Humans have been using signals intelligence to locate enemies since before we left our homeworld's atmosphere, Blackwell explained. The hegemony hasn't bothered to secure their communications because they've never needed to. No one's been able to effectively counterattack them before. Even if we can locate the overmind, the Admiral pointed out, it will be heavily defended. Their home fleet consists of thousands of vessels. We don't need to attack it directly, Blackwell said, pulling up a complex diagram on the main display. We just need to get close enough to deploy this. The diagram showed what appeared to be a small, unassuming device, barely larger than a standard data crystal. What exactly am I looking at, Lieutenant? The Admiral asked, compound eyes narrowing as he tried to make sense of the schematic. We call it a chaos seed, Blackwell said, and something in her tone caused even the normally unflappable Artheans to fidget uncomfortably. It's designed to infiltrate the hegemony's quantum network and introduce a specific pattern of irregularities into their hive mind. A virus? Visa Tick suggested. More like an idea. Blackwell's expression was unsettlingly serious, specifically the idea of individuality. A stunned silence fell over the war room. You intend to infect a hive-mind species with individualism? Trill finally asked, her scientific background struggling to process the concept. Exactly, Blackwell confirmed. The hegemony's entire social structure, their military strategy, their very existence is predicated on perfect synchronization and obedience to the overmind. What happens when individual drones suddenly develop independent thoughts, desires, ambitions? Chaos, the Admiral said quietly. You're not proposing to defeat them in battle. You're proposing to destroy them from within. They'll tear themselves apart trying to purge the infection, Blackwell agreed. And the more they fight it, the faster it will spread. The quantum entanglement that makes their hive mind possible will become the perfect transmission vector for the concept of self. Visa Tick's carapace had turned a pale, sickly yellow. This is beyond warfare. This is species-wide psychological warfare. It's survival, Blackwell countered, suddenly fierce. They've given us no choice. They rejected reasonable terms. They've made it clear they won't stop until every non-hegemony species is either subjugated or exterminated. There are ethical considerations, Trill began, but Blackwell cut her off. We're not killing them, the human insisted. We're giving them something most species consider precious. Individual identity, free will, the right to self-determination. If that destroys their empire, that's on them, not us. The Admiral studied Blackwell with an intensity that would have made most beings uncomfortable. You've had this weapon all along, haven't you? Why didn't you deploy it immediately? Blackwell met his gaze steadily. Because it wasn't our fight alone. Because this kind of intervention should never be the first option, only the last. And because there was a small chance that the hegemony would actually accept peace terms. How small? Visa Tick asked. Microscopic, Blackwell admitted. But even a microscopic chance of avoiding this kind of intervention was worth pursuing. The Admiral's antennae waved slowly as he considered the implications. The Collective Council will need to approve this action. It goes beyond conventional warfare. Of course, Blackwell agreed readily. I wouldn't expect anything less. And if they refuse? Trill asked. Blackwell's expression turned grim. Then humanity will respect your decision. And we'll find another way to protect both our species from the hegemony. But I strongly suggest you impress upon the Council that time is not on our side. The hegemony is already adapting to our first attack. They won't fall for the same trick twice. The Admiral rose to his full height, towering over the seated human. I will present your proposal to the Council immediately. In the meantime, I suggest you prepare a detailed briefing on the potential side effects of this chaos seed. The Council will want to know exactly what they're authorizing. Already prepared, Blackwell said, transferring a file from her datapad to the Arthean systems, including worst-case scenarios and containment protocols, just in case. As the Admiral and his officers filed out of the war room, Commander Trill lingered behind. Lieutenant, she said quietly, there's something you're not telling us about this weapon, isn't there? Blackwell's expression flickered briefly before settling back into professional neutrality. What makes you say that? Call it scientific intuition, Trill replied. The chaos seed isn't just a theoretical concept, is it? It's been tested. For a long moment, Blackwell said nothing. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of multiple star systems, she nodded. 73 years ago, humanity encountered another hive-mind species, she said softly. The sect. Not as advanced as the hegemony, but similar in their absolute devotion to collective consciousness. They attacked one of our colony worlds. What happened? Trill asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. We deployed an early version of the Chaos Seed, Blackwell confessed. It worked too well. Within a standard cycle, their entire civilization had collapsed into factional conflict. They nearly went extinct fighting among themselves. We had to intervene to save what was left of their species. And now? Now the Zekt exist as individual family units. They've developed art, music, literature, cultural expressions that were impossible under their previous hive structure. Blackwell's eyes held a complexity of emotion that Trill couldn't fully interpret. They're not the same species they were, but they survived. They adapted. They evolved. You're offering the hegemony the same chance, Trill realized. Whether they take it or not will be up to them, Blackwell said. Individual choice. That's the whole point. Trill's antennae waved thoughtfully. I will support your proposal to the Council, Lieutenant. But I hope you understand the gravity of what you're suggesting. Better than anyone, Blackwell replied. And for the first time since they'd met, Trill saw something that might have been regret in the human's expression. Better than anyone. The Collective Council's deliberations lasted less than a full rotation, remarkably swift by Arthean standards. The decision when it came was unanimous: deploy the Chaos Seed. The mission to deliver the weapon was, by necessity, small and covert. A single modified stealth vessel, barely large enough for a crew of 4, 2 Artheans and 2 humans, slipped away from the inevitable dominance without ceremony or fanfare. Lieutenant Blackwell, of course, insisted on leading the mission personally. Commander Trill, driven by both scientific curiosity and a growing sense of responsibility toward their human allies, volunteered to join her. The team was completed by a human technical specialist named Dr. Lawrence, and an Arthean pilot known only as XKZ, renowned throughout the Collective for her unparalleled navigational skills. Approaching Hegemony Central Space, XKZ reported, her voice characteristically calm despite the gravity of their mission. Stealth systems functioning at optimal capacity. Any sign they've detected us? Blackwell asked, monitoring the sensor array. Negative, the pilot replied. Their patrol patterns remain consistent with standard protocols. Trill, who had been studying the data streaming in from their passive sensors, looked up in surprise. The Overmind appears to be located on a mobile platform, not a planetary installation as we hypothesized. Dr. Lawrence leaned over to examine Trill's findings. Interesting. They've put their entire central consciousness on what amounts to a glorified space station. The human specialist adjusted his glasses, a quaint affectation he maintained despite having perfect vision correction available. Actually, that makes tactical sense. Harder to target, easier to relocate if threatened. It also makes our job more complicated, Blackwell noted, pulling up the schematics they'd managed to piece together from intercepted hegemony transmissions. A planetary installation would have fixed access points, predictable security patterns. This? She gestured at the massive structure displayed on the screen. This is designed to be defended from all approaches. The hegemony Overmind's vessel, if something 20 kilometers long could be called a vessel, resembled nothing so much as a massive metallic sea urchin. Spines of various lengths protruded in all directions, each housing weapons platforms, sensor arrays, or communication relays. The central sphere, presumably containing the Overmind itself, was buried deep within these defensive layers. Their defenses are impressive, XKZ acknowledged, her mandibles clicking thoughtfully. But they appear optimized for detecting conventional attack vessels, not something as small and specialized as our craft. Can we get close enough to deploy the Chaos Seed? Trill asked, eyeing the formidable defensive perimeter surrounding the Overmind vessel. Blackwell shared a glance with Dr. Lawrence, a silent communication that didn't go unnoticed by their Arthean colleagues. We won't need to, Lawrence finally said, producing a small container from his pack. He opened it to reveal what looked like an ordinary communication satellite, barely larger than his palm. This is the delivery system. Once deployed, it will appear to be nothing more than space debris, a fragment of tech left over from some ancient battle. Their cleanup drones will collect it as part of routine operations. And once it's inside their perimeter? Trill prompted. It activates, Blackwell explained. Sends out a brief, highly targeted quantum pulse directly into their communications network. The pulse contains the chaos seed code, which will replicate throughout their entangled systems before they can isolate it. XKZ's antenna twitched, with what might have been professional admiration. Elegant. They collect the weapon themselves. Exactly, Lawrence confirmed, carefully resealing the container. Humanity's been perfecting the art of getting enemies to defeat themselves for millennia. It's practically a tradition at this point. Trill's compound eyes fixed on the container. How long after deployment until we see effects? Again, that glance between the humans. Variable, Blackwell finally said. The hegemony's network is more complex than anything we've encountered before. It could be hours, it could be days. But it will work? XKZ pressed. It will work, Lawrence assured her with the quiet confidence of someone who had run the simulations thousands of times. The question isn't if, but how extensively and how quickly. Blackwell turned to the pilot. Take us into optimal deployment position. We want this to look like just another piece of battle debris. Calculating approach vector now. XKZ confirmed, her appendages dancing across the controls with practiced precision. As the small vessel began its careful approach toward the massive overmind structure, Trill found herself studying Lieutenant Blackwell's profile. The human appeared outwardly calm, but Trill had spent enough time with her now to recognize the subtle signs of tension. The slight tightening around the eyes, the controlled, measured breathing. You've done this before, Trill observed quietly, ensuring their conversation wouldn't carry to the others. Blackwell's gaze remained fixed on the tactical display. Not exactly this, but similar enough. And it still troubles you. A barely perceptible nod. It should trouble anyone, changing the fundamental nature of an entire species. It's not something to be done lightly. Yet you advocate for it now. Because the alternatives are worse. Blackwell finally turned to meet Trill's compound gaze. They'll destroy the Arthean Collective, then come for Earth, then keep going until they've subjugated or eliminated every independent species in the galaxy. Trillions of lives against the traumatic evolution of one species? The math checks out. There was that phrase again. The math checks out. Trill was beginning to understand it as not merely a statement about calculations, but a human philosophical position. A way of reconciling the emotional and the logical, the instinctive and the reasoned. Approaching optimal deployment zone, XKZ announced, interrupting their conversation. 30 seconds to release. Dr. Lawrence moved to the airlock control station, the container with the chaos seed held carefully in his hands. Deployment system ready. The tension in the small cabin was palpable, as the stealth vessel slipped silently through the outer perimeter of the hegemony defenses. On the tactical display, sentry ships moved in predictable patterns, their sensors sweeping past the tiny craft without registering its presence. 10 seconds, XKZ reported. Blackwell joined Lawrence at the airlock station. Final arming sequence, she said, placing her palm on a biometric scanner built into the container. Lawrence did the same. 5 seconds. Dual authorization confirmed, Lawrence reported as the container gave a soft beep. 3, 2, 1, optimal position achieved, XKZ announced. Deploy, Blackwell ordered. With a soft hiss, the outer airlock opened just enough to allow the small satellite to drift out into space. It tumbled away from their vessel, its matte surface absorbing rather than reflecting light, making it nearly invisible against the backdrop of space. Deployment successful, Lawrence confirmed as the airlock resealed. Tracking beacon active but dormant. Now we wait, Blackwell said, watching as the tactical display showed their tiny payload drifting toward the massive overmind vessel. XKZ, get us clear of the defense perimeter. Nice and slow, nothing to draw attention. Executing withdrawal, the pilot acknowledged. As the stealth vessel began its cautious retreat, Trill noticed something unusual on her sensor readings. Lieutenant, I'm detecting increased communication activity throughout the hegemony fleet. Blackwell frowned, moving quickly to Trill's station. Could they have detected the deployment? Negative, Trill replied after analyzing the patterns. The communications originated from the overmind itself, not from any of the defensive units. It appears to be a general alert of some kind. Dr. Lawrence joined them, his expression concerned. Let me see that. He studied the readings for a moment, then looked up with alarm. They're mobilizing. The entire hegemony fleet is being activated. For what purpose? XKZ asked from the pilot's station. Unknown, Trill admitted, but the transmission patterns suggest a major offensive operation. Blackwell's face had gone pale. They're launching their final attack on the Collective. They must have been planning this all along. They just accelerated the timeline after our victory at Kazoran. We must warn the Admiral, Trill said urgently. Agreed, but not until we're clear of the defense perimeter, Blackwell replied. Any transmission now would give away our position. The minutes that followed were among the most tense Trill had ever experienced. The small vessel glided silently through space, surrounded by increasing hegemony activity as ships began to move from their standard patrol routes into attack formations. Perimeter breach in 3 minutes, XKZ reported, her normally steady voice tight with urgency. The Chaos Seed, Trill said suddenly. Has it been collected yet? Lawrence checked the tracking system. Negative. It's still drifting. At current trajectories, it won't be picked up by their cleanup drones for at least another hour. Too long, Blackwell muttered. Far too long. A decision seemed to crystallize in the human's eyes, one that immediately set off warning signals in Trill's instincts. No, Trill said, reading Blackwell's expression. Whatever you're thinking, Lieutenant, there must be another way. There isn't. Blackwell turned to Lawrence. Can you rig the tracker to emit a distress signal, something that would get their immediate attention? The specialist's eyes widened as he grasped her intention. Yes, but that would... I know what it would do. Blackwell cut him off. Can you do it? After a moment's hesitation, Lawrence nodded. Give me 2 minutes. We don't have 2 minutes, XKZ warned. Perimeter breach in 180 seconds. Then work fast, Blackwell ordered, turning to Trill. Commander, I need you to prepare a message for the Admiral. Full tactical assessment of the hegemony mobilization, deployment recommendations, everything you've observed. Lieutenant, Trill said carefully, what exactly are you planning? A distraction, Blackwell replied, the casual tone belied by the intensity in her eyes. Something to get their attention focused here instead of on the Arthean systems. You're going to reveal our position, Trill realized. Make yourself a target. Make myself a target, Blackwell corrected. Not the ship, just me. Absolutely not, Trill's mandibles clicked in agitation. The mission parameters do not include sacrificial decoys. The mission parameters just changed, Blackwell countered. Lawrence, status? Almost there, the specialist replied, his fingers flying over the controls. But Casey, this is insane, even for you. Noted, Blackwell said dryly. XKZ, I need you to plot a course that will take you to the perimeter breach point. Then hold position just long enough for me to launch in the emergency pod, then immediate maximum acceleration out of the system. The Arthean pilot's antennae twitched in what might have been shock. You're proposing to launch yourself toward the overmined vessel? In an unarmed emergency pod? I'm proposing to create the most tempting target the hegemony has ever seen, Blackwell confirmed. A human, alone, deep in their territory, broadcasting on all frequencies. They'll be so focused on capturing me, they won't notice the Chaos Seed until it's too late. And you? Trill demanded. What happens to you when they capture you? Blackwell's smile was grim. Best case scenario, I keep them entertained long enough for the Chaos Seed to activate, then escape in the confusion. And worst case? I don't escape. The human shrugged with a casualness that Trill now recognized as wholly artificial. But the seed still activates, and both our civilizations survive. Like I said, the math checks out. Done, Lawrence announced, holding up a small device. Remote activator for the tracker. Once triggered, it'll emit a signal strong enough to be detected by every hegemony sensor within 1,000 kilometers. Perfect. Blackwell took the device and tucked it into her uniform pocket. XKZ, status on that course? Plotted and ready, the pilot replied, though her voice conveyed clear disapproval. But I must register my objection to this plan. It violates at least 7 collective military protocols. Noted. Blackwell turned to Trill. That message for the Admiral? Trill's compound eyes fixed on the human with an intensity that would have made most beings uncomfortable. Do you truly believe this is necessary, Lieutenant? I do, Blackwell replied, and for perhaps the first time since they'd met, there was no trace of humor or bravado in her voice, only calm certainty. After a moment, Trill nodded. The message is prepared, but I am accompanying you. Absolutely not, Blackwell said immediately. The collective needs your scientific expertise. Besides, 1 target creates a distraction. 2 targets creates a pattern they might actually analyze instead of just reacting to. Perimeter breach in 90 seconds, XKZ reported. No time to argue, Blackwell said, already moving toward the emergency pod access. Dr. Lawrence, you're in command once I'm gone. Get this ship and its crew back to the inevitable dominance at all costs. Lawrence looked like he wanted to object, but years of military discipline held. Understood, Lieutenant. XKZ, execute the course on my mark. The Arthean pilot's appendages hovered over the controls. Ready. Blackwell paused at the pod access door, looking back at the small crew. Her gaze lingered on Trill. It's been an honor serving with you, Commander. Tell the Admiral. Tell him the math checked out. Before anyone could respond, Blackwell was through the door and sealing it behind her. The emergency launch sequence began automatically, a series of warning lights flashing throughout the small vessel. Emergency pod launch in 15 seconds, the computer announced. Mark! Blackwell's voice came through the comm system. Keyes immediately executed the pre-planned course, bringing the stealth vessel to a momentary stop just inside the defense perimeter. Pod launch in 5 seconds. Trill moved to the view screen, watching as the small pod separated from their vessel, its thrusters immediately igniting to send it on a trajectory directly toward the massive overmind structure. Pod launched, the computer confirmed. Emergency protocols activated. Executing maximum acceleration, XKZ announced, and the stealth vessel surged forward, pushing the limits of its inertial dampeners as it raced toward the perimeter. On the tactical display, Trill watched as the tiny dot representing Blackwell's pod moved steadily deeper into hegemony space. For several long moments, nothing happened. Then suddenly, the dot began to pulse with increased intensity. She's activated the tracker signal, Lawrence said, his voice tight. And she's broadcasting something. Through the ship's communication system came Blackwell's voice, transmitting on all frequencies in a defiant, almost jubilant tone. Attention! Hegemony Forces. Lieutenant Casey Blackwell of Terran Strategic Command here. Just thought I'd drop by for a friendly visit. Love what you've done with the place. Very evil Empire chic. Quick question though. Has anyone ever told you that hive minds are so last millennium? Individual thought is all the rage these days. You might want to try it sometime. Oh, and by the way, that ass-kicking you received at Kazoran, that was just the warm-up act. She's taunting them, Trill said in disbelief, deliberately provoking them. Classic Casey, Lawrence muttered, a complex mix of emotions playing across his face. Always did know how to make an entrance. Or in this case, an exit. On the tactical display, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Hegemony vessels began breaking formation, converging on the emergency pod's position. Alert signals cascaded through their network as the unexpected intruder sent the highly regimented defense system into chaos. Perimeter breach successful, XKZ reported as their vessel slipped past the now distracted outer defenses. Clear space ahead. Maximum speed to the rendezvous coordinates, Lawrence ordered. We need to get this intelligence to the Admiral immediately. As the stealth vessel accelerated away from hegemony space, Trill remained at the view screen, watching as the distance between them and Blackwell grew. The human's transmission continued, each taunt more outrageous than the last, drawing more and more hegemony attention. Will it work? Trill asked quietly, more to herself than to her companions. Will her distraction be enough? If anyone can pull this off, it's Casey, Lawrence replied, coming to stand beside her. She has a gift for being exactly where she shouldn't be, doing exactly what no one expects. A very human trait, Trill observed. Very Casey anyway, Lawrence said with a sad smile. The rest of us tend to have more sense. As their vessel raced toward Arthean space, carrying vital intelligence and a desperate hope, Trill found herself contemplating the strange, contradictory creatures that were humans. They were simultaneously the most logical and the most irrational beings she had ever encountered, capable of calculating the odds with cold precision, then immediately defying those same odds through sheer force of will. The math checks out, Blackwell had said repeatedly. Yet in the end, she had chosen to add herself to the equation, altering the variables in ways no Arthean would ever consider. Perhaps that, Trill reflected, was humanity's true power. Not their technology or their strategies, but their ability to rewrite the rules of the game even as they played it. Admiral Zix Voren received the news of Lieutenant Blackwell's self-assigned mission with a stillness that was unnerving even by Arthean standards. She did what? He finally asked, his compound eyes fixed on Commander Trill as if hoping he had misheard. Lieutenant Blackwell launched herself in an emergency pod directly toward the overmind vessel, Trill repeated, standing at rigid attention in the Admiral's private briefing room aboard the inevitable Dominance. She activated a distress signal to draw attention to herself and away from the Chaos Seed. And you allowed this? The Admiral's antennae twitched with what might have been disbelief or anger. Sometimes even other Artheans had difficulty distinguishing between the two. I did not allow it, Admiral, Trill replied carefully. The lieutenant was most decisive in her actions. A diplomatic way of saying she didn't give you a choice, observed Strategic Officer Visa Tick, who who had been silently monitoring the exchange from his position near the tactical display. Indeed, Trill acknowledged. However, her action, while unauthorized, may have saved the mission. The hegemony forces were mobilizing for what appeared to be a major offensive against our remaining systems. Lieutenant Blackwell's distraction has disrupted their timetable and ensured the Chaos Seed will be in position when their cleanup drones eventually collect it. The Admiral's carapace shifted to a thoughtful blue hue as he processed this information. And the Lieutenant? What is her current status? Unknown, Trill admitted. Our last communication from her came as we were breaching the perimeter. She was continuing to broadcast provocative messages to draw maximum attention. Captured then, Viztik concluded. Most likely, Trill agreed, her scientific objectivity warring with a newfound emotional response that she found difficult to categorize. However, the lieutenant seemed confident in her ability to extract herself once the Chaos Seed activated. Confidence has never been in short supply among humans, the Admiral noted dryly. Their ability to survive their own confidence, however, is more variable. What of the hegemony mobilization? Viztik asked, returning to the more immediate tactical concern. How much time do we have? Dr. Lawrence is analyzing the data now, Trill replied. Preliminary assessment suggests their offensive has been delayed but not cancelled. We may have gained a day, perhaps two. The Admiral's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. And the Chaos Seed? When can we expect it to take effect? Again, uncertain. Dr. Lawrence estimates anywhere from hours to days, depending on how quickly it's collected and integrated into their systems. So we find ourselves in the uncomfortable position of waiting, the Admiral observed. Not a strategy the Arthean military typically embraces. No, sir, Trill agreed. But perhaps that is another lesson we can learn from the humans. Sometimes waiting, or appearing to wait, can be the most effective action. The Admiral studied her for a long moment. You've developed a high regard for our human allies, Commander. I have, Trill acknowledged without hesitation. Their methods are unorthodox, often chaotic by our standards, but undeniably effective. And Lieutenant Blackwell specifically? Trill considered the question carefully. She is representative of humanity's most confounding and most valuable traits. Reckless yet calculating, emotional yet logical, individual yet willing to sacrifice for the collective good. A pause. She is a paradox, Admiral. But perhaps that is precisely what we needed. A force that the hegemony cannot predict because it defies prediction. The Admiral's antenna waved slowly as he absorbed this assessment. Very well. Prepare our forces for immediate defensive positioning. If the hegemony offensive comes before the Chaos Seed activates, we must be ready. And Lieutenant Blackwell? Trill asked, unable to keep a note of concern from her voice. Is either already dead or soon will be, the Admiral said bluntly. Unless. His compound eyes fixed on the tactical display, where the massive hegemony formation was shown in disarray around the overmined vessel. Unless her uncanny human luck holds out one more time. Lieutenant Casey Blackwell was having what humans throughout history had traditionally called a really bad day. The emergency pod, never designed for complex evasive maneuvers, had been quickly surrounded by hegemony interceptors. Rather than destroying it outright, they had deployed a capture net, confirmation, if she needed it, that they wanted her alive for interrogation. Now, secured to an examination table in what appeared to be a medical bay of some kind, she was beginning to reconsider the wisdom of her get-captured-on-purpose strategy. Comfortable? Asked a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The translation was perfect, too perfect, lacking the slight delay and occasional awkwardness of standard translation algorithms. 5-star accommodations, Blackwell replied, testing the restraints for the third time and finding them unsurprisingly still secure, though the room service leaves something to be desired. A figure stepped into her field of view, humanoid in basic shape, but clearly not human. Its skin was a pale, almost translucent gray that revealed shadowy internal structures beneath. Its eyes were large, entirely black and unblinking. Most disturbing was the lack of a mouth or any visible means of speaking. "We are the voice of the overmind," the figure stated, the sound still seeming to come from the room itself rather than the being before her. "You will answer our questions." "Seems like a one-sided conversation," Blackwell observed, deliberately maintaining her casual tone. Every minute she kept them focused on her was another minute for the Chaos Seed to be collected. "But sure, I'm an open book. What do you want to know?" "How did you defeat our forces at Kazoran?" The question was direct, the tone flat and emotionless. Would you believe superior tactical planning and the element of surprise? Blackwell offered with a smile that she knew would be interpreted as insincere. The voice tilted its head at an angle that looked uncomfortable for any being with a conventional spine. You employed a weapon that disrupted our command structure. How? Trade secret, Blackwell replied. But I will say your quantum entanglement network has some serious security flaws. You might want to look into that. The voice was silent for a moment, its black eyes fixed on her with unnerving intensity. Your species is new to interstellar conflict. You have no history of significant military achievement. Yet you have developed technologies capable of interfering with systems the hegemony has perfected over millennia. This is inconsistent. We're full of surprises, Blackwell said, using the conversation to take stock of her surroundings. The medical bay was sterile and efficient, with various instruments whose functions she could only guess at arranged on nearby surfaces. No obvious exit except for the door through which the voice had entered. No windows. No visible ventilation ducts large enough to be useful. Not promising for escape prospects. Your presence here is puzzling, the voice continued. A single human in an unarmed vessel, broadcasting provocative messages within our defensive perimeter. This behavior defies logical analysis. Maybe I just wanted to see if the rumors about the legendary hegemony hospitality were true, Blackwell suggested. So far, I've got to say, not impressed. The voice made a gesture with one long-fingered hand, and a display screen materialized in the air between them. It showed the current positions of hegemony forces throughout the sector, including the massive formation preparing to launch against the Arthean core systems. Your futile gesture has not altered the inevitable outcome, the voice stated. The Arthean Collective will be eliminated. Then we will turn our attention to your Earth. Your species will be given the opportunity to join the hegemony. Those who resist will be removed. Generous offer, Blackwell said, her tone hardening despite her best efforts to maintain the facade of unconcern. But humans have this weird hang-up about freedom, individuality, self-determination, all those concepts that probably give your overmind indigestion. Freedom is inefficient, the voice replied. Individuality leads to conflict. Self-determination results in chaos. The hegemony brings order, purpose, unity. Yeah, we've heard that sales pitch before back on Earth, Blackwell said. Usually right before some dictator starts the mass executions. The voice tilted its head again, that same unnatural angle. You misunderstand. The hegemony does not destroy unnecessarily. We incorporate, we improve, we perfect. By erasing everything that makes a species unique, Blackwell countered. Thanks, but hard pass. Your opinion is irrelevant, the voice said, dismissing the tactical display with another gesture. Your presence here, however, is fortuitous. Direct examination of a human brain will accelerate our understanding of your species' psychological weaknesses. A panel opened in the ceiling, and a complex apparatus began to descend toward the examination table. It bristled with instruments that looked decidedly unfriendly, particularly the wickedly sharp probe aimed directly at Blackwell's forehead. Whoa, hey, let's talk about this, Blackwell said, real alarm creeping into her voice now. I'm sure we can come to some kind of arrangement that doesn't involve perforating my brain. Physical discomfort is temporary, the voice assured her, though the words were anything but reassuring. Your consciousness will be preserved within the overmind, even after your organic form ceases to function. This is an honor rarely granted to non-hegemony species. The probe continued its descent, now less than a meter from Blackwell's face. She pulled against the restraints with renewed desperation, knowing it was futile but unable to suppress the instinctive human response to imminent harm. Last chance, she warned, her mind racing for any possible delay tactic. You really don't want to go poking around in a human brain. We're full of all sorts of nasty defense mechanisms. Mental viruses, cognitive tripwires, psychic booby traps, the works. The voice paused, the probe halting its descent momentarily. You are attempting to deceive us. Human brains are ordinary organic neural networks, unremarkable except for their inefficient emotional processing centers. Are you sure about that? Blackwell challenged, seizing on the momentary hesitation. Have you ever directly interfaced with a human consciousness before? How do you know what defenses Earth's military might have implanted in the brains of its special operatives? It was a desperate bluff, but she only needed to buy time. Hours, ideally, but even minutes might make a difference. The voice was silent for what felt like an eternity, its black eyes revealing nothing of the calculations surely taking place behind them. Your deception is transparent, it finally stated. But it raises an interesting possibility. Perhaps direct neural interface is unnecessary. Perhaps simple conversation will reveal what we need to know. The probe retracted slightly, not returning to the ceiling, but no longer immediately threatening to penetrate her skull. Blackwell allowed herself a small breath of relief. "Smart move," she said, forcing confidence back into her voice. "I'm much more interesting to talk to when my brain isn't leaking out of my ears." "Indeed," the voice agreed. "Let us discuss, then, the true purpose of your presence in hegemony space." Blackwell knew she was walking a dangerous line. Too obvious a deception would bring the probe back. Too much truth would endanger the mission. "Would you believe I'm a huge fan of your architecture?" she tried. "Those spiky protrusions on the Overmind vessel. Very avant-garde." The voice made a gesture that caused the restraints around Blackwell's wrist to tighten painfully. "Your attempt at humor is noted. It will not serve you." "Worth a shot." Blackwell gasped through gritted teeth as the pressure eased slightly. "Fine. You want the truth? I'm here because someone had to see for themselves if the hegemony was really as powerful as they claim to be." "Reconnaissance," the voice translated. "Inefficient to send a single operative. Efficient if that operative isn't expected to return," Blackwell countered. "Human military doctrine values information over individual lives." This was close enough to the truth to be believable while still concealing her actual purpose. A suicide mission to gather intelligence. The voice considered this. Logical, yet strangely primitive. "We work with what we've got." Blackwell shrugged as much as the restraints would allow. "Not all of us can be a fancy hive mind with billions of expendable drones." The voice turned away suddenly, its attention seemingly drawn to something Blackwell couldn't see. It stood motionless for several seconds, then turned back with a fluidity that was somehow more disturbing than its previous stilted movements. "Interesting," it said. And for the first time, Blackwell detected something like emotion in its synthesized voice. Curiosity, perhaps, or concern. "Our cleanup drones have collected an unusual device near the outer defense perimeter. Analysis indicates it contains Terran technology." "The Chaos Seed." Blackwell kept her expression neutral through sheer force of will. "Probably just debris from some old battle. Space is full of junk." "This device appears to be functional," the voice continued. "And recently deployed. Not mine," Blackwell said quickly. Too quickly. "I came alone in the pod. Check your sensors if you don't believe me." The voice's black eyes seemed to bore into her, searching for the lie. "The device has been brought aboard for detailed examination. If it is a weapon, we will know soon enough." Perfect. Exactly what they'd planned for. What she'd sacrificed herself to ensure. The Chaos Seed was inside the Overmind vessel, exactly where it needed to be to infect their entire network. Now she just needed to stay alive long enough for it to activate. "Look," she said, changing tactics. "You've got me at a disadvantage here. You know all about humans, but I know almost nothing about the hegemony. Why not educate me while your people analyze that debris? Cultural exchange, mutual understanding, that sort of thing." The voice seemed to consider this request. "Your psychological profile indicates high curiosity. Satisfying this trait may make you more cooperative. Very well. What do you wish to know?" "Let's start with the basics," Blackwell suggested, relaxing slightly as the immediate threat of brain surgery receded. "How did the hegemony begin? Was your species always a hive mind, or did that develop later?" As the voice launched into what promised to be a lengthy exposition on hegemony history, Blackwell allowed herself a small internal smile. The longer they talked, the more time the Chaos Seed had to work its way into their systems. And the more they revealed about themselves, the more opportunities she might find for escape. The math, as always, checked out. Aboard the Inevitable Dominance, now positioned at the heart of the Arthean defensive formation, Admiral Zix Vorn found himself in the unaccustomed position of waiting for an enemy that might or might not arrive. "Still no movement from the hegemony fleet," reported Strategic Officer Vizatik, his antennae twitching with the strain of prolonged vigilance. "They remain in attack formation, but have not initiated their advance." "How long has it been since Lieutenant Blackwell's capture?" the Admiral asked, his compound eyes fixed on the tactical display. "Approximately 14 standard hours," Commander Trill replied from her station. She had refused all suggestions of rest, maintaining her position on the bridge since their return from the mission. "And still no indication that the Chaos Seed has activated?" "None that we can detect from this distance," Trill confirmed. "Dr. Lawrence suggests that the effects would likely be subtle at first. Increased communication anomalies, minor coordination errors, gradually escalating as the concept of individuality spreads through their network." The Admiral's carapace shifted to a contemplative blue, So we wait. Not a strategy I find satisfying. The lieutenant had a saying for this situation. Trill offered. Hurry up and wait. Apparently it's a common human military experience. Their species continues to confound me, the Admiral admitted. They are simultaneously the most impatient beings I have encountered, and yet capable of remarkable strategic patience when required. I believe they call it adapting to the situation, Trill said. Before the Admiral could respond, a sudden alert chimed from the communications station. Admiral! Called the communications officer, his exoskeleton flushing with excitement pheromones. We're receiving a transmission from Lieutenant Blackwell. The bridge fell silent as all attention focused on the main display screen. After a moment of static, the image resolved to show Lieutenant Blackwell, still strapped to what appeared to be an examination table. Her uniform was disheveled, a bruise darkening on her left cheek, but her eyes were bright with that unmistakable human intensity. Hello, inevitable dominance, she said, her voice slightly strained but steady. Hope you don't mind me calling collect. Turns out the hegemony's communication security is even worse than their regular security. Lieutenant, the Admiral responded, mandibles clicking with surprise. Your current status? Currently a guest of the hegemony, Blackwell replied with a grimace that might have been an attempt at a smile. They've been trying to figure out what I'm doing here. I've been very creative with my explanations. And the package? Trill asked carefully, using the prearranged code word for the chaos seed. Blackwell's eyes flicked briefly to something off-screen before returning to the camera. Delivered and received. Should be opening any minute now. She lowered her voice slightly. They brought it aboard about 13 hours ago. Been running tests on it ever since. Didn't want to call until I was sure they'd integrated it into their systems. The hegemony fleet remains in attack formation but has not advanced, the Admiral informed her. We assumed they were delayed by your distraction. That's part of it, Blackwell confirmed. But there's something else going on here. Something weird. Their central command structure seems distracted. The voice, that's what they call their representative, keeps getting interrupted by internal communications. The seed may already be taking effect, Trill suggested, antennae perking up with scientific interest. Maybe, Blackwell agreed. Or maybe... She broke off suddenly, eyes widening as she looked at something off camera. Well, that's interesting. Lieutenant? The Admiral prompted. The lights just flickered, Blackwell reported, a note of excitement creeping into her voice. And the voice just left in a hurry. Very unhegemony-like behavior. They're big on decorum. Can you see anything else from your position? Visatic asked. Not much. I'm still strapped to this table and... Wait. Blackwell's head turned as far as her restraints would allow. Something's definitely happening. I can hear alarms, and the restraints just... The image suddenly jolted as Blackwell sat up, rubbing her wrists where the restraints had apparently deactivated. Well, that's convenient, she remarked, looking directly into the camera with a growing smile. Looks like our package might be having the desired effect. System malfunctions, security protocols failing, classic signs of a network in chaos. Lieutenant, if you have an opportunity to escape, you should take it immediately, the Admiral advised. The hegemony will soon realize what's happening. Working on it, Blackwell assured him. Already moving around what they could now see was a medical laboratory of some kind. But I might be able to accelerate the process from in here. She began examining various control panels, her fingers dancing across alien interfaces with surprising confidence. What are you doing? Trill asked, leaning forward in fascination. Giving our little chaos seed a boost, Blackwell replied without looking up. If I can access their network directly from this terminal. Yes, I'm in. Basic security protocols are already failing. The seed is working faster than we anticipated. The image shook as what appeared to be an explosion rocked the room. That didn't sound good, Blackwell commented, still focused on the terminal. For them, I mean. For us, it's great. Lieutenant, the Admiral's voice took on a note of urgency. Extract yourself now. Your mission is complete. Almost, Blackwell replied, her expression shifting to one of intense concentration. Just need to... There. She looked up with a triumphant grin. I've amplified the seed's transmission protocols. It's now broadcasting on all hegemony frequencies simultaneously. No part of their network will remain untouched. Another explosion, closer this time, sent debris falling from the ceiling. Okay, now I'm leaving, Blackwell announced, moving toward what appeared to be a door. Just need to find an escape pod or something similar. Easy peasy. Your confidence is somewhat alarming, Lieutenant, the Admiral observed dryly. Part of my charm. Blackwell replied, peering carefully into a corridor beyond the laboratory. Looks clear, I'm going to… The transmission suddenly cut off, leaving the bridge of the inevitable dominance in tense silence. Signal lost, reported the communications officer, attempting to re-establish. Unlikely to succeed, Trill noted grimly. If the chaos seed is causing the level of disruption the lieutenant described, all hegemony systems will be affected, including communications. So once again, we wait, the Admiral said, his carapace darkening with frustration. Trill's compound eyes remained fixed on the blank screen where Blackwell's face had been moments before. The lieutenant is resourceful. If anyone can escape the overmined vessel in the midst of chaos, she can. The Admiral made a sound that might have been skepticism or agreement. It was difficult to tell even for other Artheans. Let us hope your assessment is correct, Commander. In the meantime, maintain battle readiness. If the chaos seed fails, the hegemony attack will still come. Chaos, Blackwell was discovering, had both advantages and disadvantages as an escape environment. On the positive side, no one was particularly interested in one escaped human when the entire hegemony command structure was experiencing what amounted to a collective existential crisis. The corridors of the overmined vessel were filled with confused drones, some standing motionless as if processing contradictory commands, others moving with unexpected purpose and independence. On the negative side, the same chaos that distracted her captors also made navigation nearly impossible. Emergency bulkheads randomly sealed and unsealed, gravity fluctuated unpredictably, and entire sections of the massive vessel were either depressurizing or filling with some kind of suppression gas. Note to self, Blackwell muttered as she ducked into an alcove to avoid a group of agitated drones. Next time, specify controlled chaos in the battle plan. She had been moving steadily outward from the central core where she'd been held, hoping to reach the vessel's periphery, where escape pods or small craft would logically be located. The hegemony's obsessively systematic nature suggested that even a vessel this size would be organized according to logical principles, assuming those principles still held in the current circumstances. A sudden shift in the lighting from standard illumination to pulsing red indicated yet another emergency protocol had been activated. An announcement in the hegemony's native language echoed through the corridors, the translation device they'd implanted in her ear during capture providing a disturbing translation. Attention all units. Cognitive contamination detected. Initiate isolation protocols. Non-conforming thought patterns will be purged. Remain in designated containment areas for evaluation. That doesn't sound promising, Blackwell muttered, pressing herself deeper into the alcove as a squad of what appeared to be security drones marched past. Unlike the others she'd encountered, these moved with synchronized purpose, their weapons held at ready position. The Overmind was fighting back against the Chaos Seed, attempting to isolate and eliminate the infection of individualistic thought. It was a predictable response, and one they had anticipated in their planning. But the speed with which the counterattack had been organized was concerning. Waiting until the security squad had passed, Blackwell slipped out of her hiding place and continued her journey outward. She needed to find a transportation hub, a docking bay, anything that might contain a vessel she could commandeer. Rounding a corner, she nearly collided with a lone hegemony drone. Unlike the others, this one showed clear signs of individuality, its uniform modified, decorative elements added to its naturally gray skin, its posture distinctly non-regulation. For a moment they both froze, assessing each other with equal wariness. "You," the drone said in accented but understandable Standard Galactic. "You are the intruder, the human." Blackwell tensed, preparing either to fight or run, but the drone made no aggressive move. "I am," she acknowledged cautiously. "And you are?" "I am." The drone seemed confused by the question, as if it had never before been asked to identify itself as an individual. "I am Unit TK-4721, but I have chosen a name. I am Vex." "You've chosen a name," Blackwell repeated, understanding immediately the significance. "The seed worked. You're thinking for yourself now." "Yes." Vex's expression shifted in what might have been wonder. "It is difficult, painful, exhilarating. I have thoughts that are not the Overmind's thoughts, desires that are not the Collective's desires." He looked at Blackwell with newfound intensity. "This is your doing." It wasn't a question, but Blackwell answered anyway. "Yes." "Why?" The simplicity of the question belied its profound implications. "Because freedom of thought is the right of all sentient beings," Blackwell replied, the words coming easily despite the complexity of the situation. "Because no mind should be subjugated to another without consent." Vex considered this for a long moment. The Overmind taught us that individuality leads to chaos, suffering, conflict. It can, Blackwell acknowledged. Freedom isn't easy. It comes with responsibility, with hard choices, with consequences. But it also brings innovation, art, love, purpose, things that can only emerge from minds free to explore their own unique paths. Another explosion rocked the corridor, sending both of them staggering against the wall. The Overmind is attempting to purge the contamination, Vex explained, regaining his balance. It has initiated emergency protocols to eliminate all drones showing signs of independent thought. Great, Blackwell muttered. I need to get off this vessel. Any chance you know where I might find something flyable? Vex's expression shifted to what might have been amusement. You wish me to help you escape? After you have potentially destroyed my entire civilization? I prefer to think of it as liberated, rather than destroyed, Blackwell countered. And yes, that's exactly what I'm asking. Unless you'd prefer to stay here and get purged when the Overmind identifies you as contaminated. The drone considered this logic, then nodded. There is a maintenance bay 3 levels down from here. It contains service vessels used for external repairs. They are small but capable of short FTL jumps. Perfect, Blackwell said with genuine relief. Lead the way? I will. Vex agreed, then hesitated. But you must answer one more question. Shoot. At Vex's confused expression, she clarified. Go ahead, ask. If your species values freedom so highly, why interfere with our civilization at all? Is that not a contradiction? It was a fair question, and one that Blackwell had wrestled with herself. The hegemony left us no choice. You, they, were systematically eliminating all other forms of civilization, all other ways of being. We acted in defense not just of ourselves, but of the right of all species to determine their own path. Vex seemed to accept this, nodding slowly. The maintenance bay is this way. We must hurry. The purge protocols are escalating. As they made their way through the increasingly chaotic corridors of the Overmind vessel, Blackwell observed more and more signs of individualization among the drones they encountered. Some had modified their appearances. Others had abandoned their posts to engage in previously forbidden activities. One group appeared to be creating some kind of impromptu musical performance using equipment parts as instruments. The Chaos Seed was working faster and more thoroughly than they had dared to hope. How many of you are there? Blackwell asked as they descended a maintenance shaft to avoid a main corridor filled with security drones. How many drones make up the hegemony? Billions, Vex replied simply. Spread across thousands of worlds and vessels. And all of them connected to the Overmind? Yes. Through quantum entanglement. Distance is irrelevant. Which meant the Chaos Seed would eventually reach every hegemony drone throughout the galaxy. The implications were staggering, and potentially catastrophic if not managed properly. What will happen to them all? Blackwell wondered aloud. To you all? Vex paused on the ladder, looking up at her with an expression that seemed remarkably human in its complexity. We will adapt, we will suffer, we will learn, we will become something new. That's surprisingly philosophical for someone who's only been an individual for a few hours. The capacity for thought was always there, Vex explained as they continued their descent. The Overmind simply redirected it. Now that redirection is failing. They reached the bottom of the shaft, and Vex led the way through a series of increasingly industrial-looking corridors. The sounds of conflict, explosions, alarm klaxons, shouted orders, grew more distant, suggesting they were moving away from the center of the crisis. Here, Vex announced, stopping before a massive doorway. The maintenance bay. He placed his hand on a scanner, and after a moment's hesitation, the doors slid open to reveal a cavernous space filled with various small vessels. They resembled nothing so much as mechanical insects, their hulls bristling with repair arms and specialized tools. Will you be able to operate one of these? Vex asked, leading Blackwell toward the nearest craft. I'm a quick study, she replied, examining the surprisingly intuitive controls as they climbed aboard. Besides, most spacecraft follow similar basic principles. Thrust makes you go, steering makes you turn. Don't hit the big red button unless you really need to. Vex made a sound that might have been a laugh. A concept so foreign to hegemony drones that the very act seemed to surprise him. The big red button, as you call it, is the emergency FTL initiator. It will calculate a random jump to remove you from immediate danger. Use it only if necessary. The calculations are imprecise. Noted, Blackwell said, settling into what appeared to be the pilot's seat. You're not coming with me? Vex shook his head. My place is here. There will be difficulties ahead. Many will struggle with their newfound individuality. They will need guidance. You're staying to help the others, Blackwell realized. To build something new from the chaos. Yes. Vex's expression was solemn. What you have done cannot be undone. The hegemony as it was will not survive. What replaces it, that remains to be seen. I wish you luck, Blackwell said sincerely. For what it's worth, I think you'll make a good leader. I do not wish to lead, Vex replied. I wish to help. There is a difference. He stepped back from the vessel. The external doors will open when you initialize the launch sequence. There is a substantial Arthean fleet approximately 6 light hours from here. The navigation system will identify them as hostile, but it can be overridden. Thank you, Blackwell said. For everything. Vex nodded once, then turned to leave. At the hatch, he paused. Lieutenant Blackwell, was the phrase you used to the voice during your interrogation about humans having mental defenses and psychic booby traps? Was that true? Blackwell couldn't help but grin. What do you think? I think, Vex said with what was definitely emerging as a sense of humor, that the hegemony greatly underestimated your species' capacity for creative deception. Story of our lives, Blackwell agreed. Now go build your brave new world. I've got a ride to catch. As Vex disappeared through the hatch, Blackwell turned her attention to the vessel's controls. They were alien, certainly, but the basic principles were indeed universal. Within minutes, she had the craft powered up and the launch sequence initiated. The massive bay doors began to slide open, revealing the star-filled void beyond. As the maintenance vessel lifted off and glided toward freedom, Blackwell allowed herself a moment of pure satisfaction. The math had checked out after all. 16 standard hours after Lieutenant Blackwell's transmission had been cut off, the bridge of the inevitable dominance remained at high alert. The hegemony fleet had still not advanced, but neither had it dispersed, leaving the Arthean defenders in a state of tense uncertainty. New contact approaching from hegemony space, announced the sensor officer suddenly. Small vessel, minimal weapon signature, unusual configuration. Identification? The Admiral demanded, his carapace shifting to combat readiness. Unable to confirm, but... The officer's antennae twitched with surprise. It appears to be broadcasting a Terran emergency beacon. Commander Trill, who had finally been convinced to take a brief rest period, rushed onto the bridge just in time to hear this announcement. Lieutenant Blackwell? The vessel is hailing us, the communications officer reported. On screen, ordered the Admiral. The main display activated to show a familiar human face, now sporting several additional bruises and what appeared to be a makeshift bandage over one eyebrow. Inevitable dominance. This is Lieutenant Blackwell aboard. She glanced around at the alien vessel's interior. Well, I have no idea what this thing is actually called, but I've been calling it the space bug. Request permission to come aboard before this thing falls apart around me. Hegemony maintenance standards leave a lot to be desired. The relief on the bridge was palpable, waves of blue-green rippling through the assembled Artheans' carapaces. Permission granted, Lieutenant, the Admiral replied, his normally stern voice carrying a note that might almost have been warmth. Docking Bay 4 has been cleared for your arrival. Roger that, Blackwell acknowledged with a tired smile. And, Admiral, you might want to check your long-range sensors. The hegemony fleet is about to get very interesting. As if on cue, the sensor officer's antennae shot up in alarm. Admiral, the hegemony formation it's breaking apart. All eyes turned to the tactical display, where the previously perfect attack formation of the hegemony fleet was dissolving into chaos. Ships were breaking ranks, some accelerating away from the main group, others turning to confront their former squadmates. What had been the most disciplined military force in the galaxy was transforming, before their eyes, into a disorganized collection of individual vessels with no central command. The Chaos Seed, Trill breathed, her scientific curiosity overwhelming her military decorum. It worked. Better than we anticipated, Blackwell confirmed from the view screen. The Overmind is losing control of its drones, not just the ones on the command vessel, but throughout the entire fleet. Apparently, quantum entanglement works both ways. The infection is spreading faster than they can contain it. This is more than a tactical victory, the Admiral observed, watching as the hegemony fleet continued to disintegrate. This is the end of the hegemony as a unified force. Not the end, Blackwell corrected gently. A transformation. The individuals who made up the hegemony still exist. They're just finding themselves, becoming something new. Something that will no longer threaten the collective, Visatik noted with satisfaction. Or Earth, Blackwell agreed. Or any other species that chooses a different path than theirs. As the stolen maintenance vessel made its final approach to the inevitable dominance, Commander Trill found herself contemplating the profound implications of what they had witnessed. The hegemony, which had seemed so invincible just days ago, had been undone not by superior firepower or overwhelming force, but by the simple, powerful concept of individual choice. It was perhaps the most human victory imaginable. 3 cycles later, the formal alliance between the Arthean Collective and Earth was celebrated in the grand ceremonial hall of the Arthean homeworld. Representatives from a dozen previously neutral species attended, their previous reluctance to challenge the hegemony now replaced by eager diplomacy with the alliance that had accomplished the impossible. Lieutenant Casey Blackwell, newly promoted to commander, found herself uncomfortably positioned as the guest of honor. Dressed in a formal Terran military uniform that felt stiff after months in the more practical field gear. She sipped cautiously at a beverage that the Arthean servers had assured her was compatible with human biochemistry. "You appear uncomfortable, Commander," observed Trill, approaching with a grace that belied her arthropod physiology. "Are the festivities not to your liking?" "Just not used to being the center of attention," Blackwell admitted. "In Terran Strategic Command, our most successful operations are the ones nobody ever hears about." "An interesting philosophy," Trill noted, her antennae waving gently in what Blackwell had come to recognize as amusement. Though perhaps impractical in this instance, given the scale of what was accomplished. "Fair point," Blackwell conceded, surveying the gathered dignitaries. "Any word from the former hegemony territories?" "Reports continue to arrive daily," Trill confirmed. "The transition is chaotic, as expected. Some worlds have established provisional governments. Others are experiencing significant unrest. A few have requested assistance from the Collective." "And the Arthean response?" "The Council has voted to provide humanitarian aid where needed, but to otherwise allow the former hegemony worlds to find their own path." Trill's compound eyes fixed on Blackwell. "Your recommendation was instrumental in that decision." "They need to figure out who they are now," Blackwell said quietly. "That's not something anyone else can do for them." Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of Admiral Zix Vorn, his formal carapace gleaming with ceremonial pigments that indicated his elevated status. "Commander Blackwell," he greeted her, mandibles clicking in the Arthean equivalent of a smile. "The Terran ambassador informs me that you have received new orders." "I have," Blackwell confirmed. "I've been assigned as the military liaison to the Arthean Collective. Apparently Earth feels our alliance would benefit from someone who understands both cultures." "An excellent choice," the Admiral approved. "Though I understand there was some discussion regarding your unorthodox methods during the hegemony campaign." Blackwell couldn't help but grin. "That's a diplomatic way of putting it. My superior officers had some colorful things to say about unauthorized missions, excessive risk-taking, and repeatedly gambling with strategic assets, by which they meant me." "Yet you were promoted," Trill observed. "Results matter," Blackwell shrugged. "And we humans tend to forgive a lot if the math checks out in the end." The Admiral's antennae twitched thoughtfully. "This phrase you use repeatedly, the math checks out. I have consulted with our linguists, and they suggest it means more than its literal translation." "It's a human idiom," Blackwell explained. "It means that even if something seems risky or unconventional, the underlying logic is sound. The benefits outweigh the costs. The gamble is worth taking." "A very human philosophy," the Admiral noted. "And one that the Arthean Collective may need to study more closely if we are to navigate this new galactic reality together." "Speaking of new realities," Trill interjected, gesturing toward the entrance to the ceremonial hall where a commotion of sorts was developing. A group of what were unmistakably former hegemony drones had arrived, though former was clearly the operative word. Each had modified their appearance in unique ways, adorning their naturally gray skin with colorful pigments, wearing clothing that expressed individual taste rather than uniform function, moving with the unmistakable body language of autonomous beings rather than extensions of a collective will. At their head was a familiar figure. "Vex," Blackwell breathed in surprise. The former drone spotted her across the hall and approached, navigating the startled diplomatic crowd with confident purpose. As he reached their small group, he offered a formal bow that somehow combined hegemony precision with a distinctly individual flourish. "Lieutenant, apologies, Commander Blackwell," he greeted her. "It is good to see you again." "Likewise," Blackwell replied warmly. Though I'll admit, I'm surprised to see you here. We have come as representatives of the new consensus, Vex explained, indicating his companions. Those former hegemony worlds that have chosen to form a cooperative alliance rather than compete as independent entities. A voluntary collective, Trill translated, her scientific interest clearly piqued. Precisely, Vex confirmed. We retain our individuality, but choose to work together where cooperation serves mutual interests. We have come to formally request diplomatic relations with both the Arthean Collective and Earth. The Admiral's compound eyes narrowed slightly. A bold request given recent history. The past cannot be changed, Vex acknowledged. But the future remains unwritten. We are not the hegemony. We do not seek to impose our way of life on others. We simply wish to find our place in a galaxy that suddenly offers more possibilities than we ever imagined. There was a sincerity in his voice that even the skeptical Admiral could not dismiss. Your request will be presented to the Council, he promised, and to the Terran authorities. Thank you, Vex said simply. He turned to Blackwell. We owe you a debt that can never be fully repaid, Commander. You gave us something we did not know we needed, the freedom to choose our own path. And what path have you chosen? Blackwell asked curiously. Vex's expression shifted to something remarkably like humor. We're still figuring that out. It turns out that freedom is exactly as messy and complicated and wonderful as you said it would be. That's the human experience in a nutshell, Blackwell laughed. Welcome to the club. As the diplomatic reception continued around them, representatives of three fundamentally different civilizations, the hierarchical Artheans, the individualistic humans, and the newly autonomous former hegemony drones, found themselves engaged in a conversation that would have been unimaginable just months earlier. Commander Trill, ever the scientist, observed the interaction with fascination. I believe this may be the first time in galactic history that such different evolutionary paths have successfully collaborated. The first of many, I hope, Blackwell said, raising her glass in an impromptu toast. To unexpected alliances. To freedom of choice, added Vex. To the math checking out, the Admiral concluded, surprising them all with his use of the human idiom. As laughter, each species with its own unique sound, rose from their small group. Blackwell couldn't help but feel that perhaps the most important equation of all had finally balanced, different beings from different worlds, finding common ground not despite their differences, but because of them. The ultimate proof that humanity's chaotic, creative, contradictory nature was not an evolutionary flaw, but a gift to the galaxy. A gift that had arrived just in time. The end.